Really quite by chance, I found myself in the city, and there were some strange processions going on and wonderful music and dancing and rituals being performed, and I asked, what's this all about?
Something shocking just happened on the Temple Mount, and the world is still reeling. What unfolded here isn't just an event. It's a momentous shift that could change everything we thought we knew about this ancient site. This isn't just about politics or history. It's about something much deeper, connected to prophecies that have been waiting for this very moment. Could this be the sign of redemption the faithful have been anticipating? What just occurred has never happened before, and its implications are more profound than anyone could have predicted. A pivotal act took place here today, and it may be setting the stage for something much bigger, something that has the potential to reshape the future of worship. Stick with us, because the truth behind this unexpected moment will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. Shifts in the landscape. The Temple Mount has long been a site of religious reverence and political tension, garnering attention worldwide for its significance to Jews, Christians, and Muslims. Of late, though, subtle but sure machinations began. What's especially noteworthy is not so much what's taking place, but also what isn't. In the past, any efforts by Jews to pray or conduct rituals in the Temple Mount led to riotous protests and political turmoil. Well, now, Jewish worshippers are finally being allowed to exercise their religion with improved freedom, a change so many believed would never come. If that was not enough, the restrictions were always so tightly wound at this site. In the past, Jewish worshippers were forbidden to pray openly. Practicing such actions often ended up in violent confrontations or international repercussions. However, nowadays, activities like Jewish prayer quorums and blowing the shofars during the Jewish holidays are conducted without much hindrance. The rising acceptance constitutes a significant shift from the past and seems to indicate some evolution both in politics and religious attitudes regarding the Temple Mount. The changes are even more important because they are occurring in the context of increasing global political fluctuations and uncompromising arguments and interests at stake about the sovereignty of the Temple Mount. It was, after all, Islamic countries that had always strongly objected to any form of Jewish presence or worship at the site. Of course, the fact that Jewish worship is now taking place with little resistance speaks to a fundamental shift in the way the world views the Temple Mount. No longer simply a political flashpoint, but increasingly as a spiritual site that may well be connected to the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. All these herald something much larger in the making. The concept of rebuilding the temple on the Temple Mount had long been considered an impossible dream because of the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Yet today, as there is increasing public acceptance of Jewish prayer and work by the Temple Institute preparing the necessary sacred instruments, the secret laying of the Third Temple's groundwork continues. This moment in history suggests that the Temple Mount, long a site of tension and conflict, is becoming a focal point for spiritual and prophetic change, with the potential for profound shifts in both the spiritual landscape and geopolitical realities. As the Temple Mount evolves, its deep legacy of devotion and conflict sets the stage for what's coming next. A legacy of conflict and devotion. The Temple Mount is considered one of the most sacred religious sites in the world, with Jews, Christians, and Muslims holding deep reverence for it. Throughout the thousands of years of its existence, faith and conflict have been symbolized within this site. For Jews, it is the location of the First and Second Temples, a central factor in their religion and history. The Mount is significant for Muslims because it houses the Al-Aqsa Mosque, one of the most sacred places in Islam. In the same vein, Christians have a sensitivity to Mount because it is associated with the life of Jesus Christ. For centuries, the Temple Mount has been the site of a battlefield, not in the land contentions, but competing views on religions. The Temple Mount has been the center of conflicting histories of conquest, destruction, and restoration. The site has been destroyed and rebuilt multiple times as a new chapter in its very complex history. Its significance for each faith triggers reverence and rivalry, making it one of the most contentious locations in the world. The Mount has borne witness to battles of old and new, as the religious and political powers constantly fought to dominate this sacred site. Conflict aside, the Temple Mount is a symbol of devotion. For centuries, it has been the point of Jewish prayers, a gathering place for faithful believers who mourn over the loss of the Second Temple and pray for its rebuilding one day. It is a place of worship and pilgrimage for Muslims. The Christians continue to visit the site for connection with the roots of their faith. This common passion for one piece of land makes the role of the Temple Mount deeply spiritually significant for multiple cultures of beliefs. Today, the Temple Mount is still a symbol of division and hope. This site continues to carry the deep religious meaning of the faith and identity that is filled into it by those who revere it. Sure, the conflicts around Temple Mount are far from being settled, but its legacy of devotion remains as strong as ever, with millions of people around the world still looking toward it as a symbol of hope, redemption, and divine promise. The prophetic blueprint for the future. For centuries, the Temple Mount has not only been a site of religious value, but it also features in the focal point of biblical prophecies. Rebuilding the Jewish temple on this holy site is a central theme of many of the prophecies the Bible contains, especially concerning the end time period. The scriptural records of the Jews and Christians at the same time speak about the restoration of the temple. This event, therefore, will help bring about God's plan for the world. In both faiths, it is deeply interwoven in the prophetic blueprint and must shape hopes and beliefs regarding the future. The Temple Institute, an organization focused on preparations for the rebuilding of the Third Temple, has been working for over 30 years to make these prophecies a reality. They have long studied the biblical descriptions of the temple and have now started crafting sacred instruments, garments, and other necessary items required for its construction. From sacred vessels to priestly garments, every detail was meticulously planned following ancient instructions. Such attention to the scriptural blueprint underscores their deep commitment to the idea that the Third Temple one day will rise again on the Temple Mount, exactly as foretold in Scripture. An important aspect of the work of the Temple Institute is its preparation of the red heifers required for the temple's dedication ceremony under the Hebrew Bible. The ritual use of red heifers is an explicit requirement to start temple worship, for which the necessary purification rites depend on this act. Such efforts are seen by many to be the tangible signs that the preparations of the temple are real, in action, and not just theoretical. This growing collection of ritual objects and sacred artifacts shows that the rebuilding of the temple is becoming more feasible year after year. Though these preparations elicit excitement coupled with controversy, they are also significant markers of prophecy in motion. Many Christians believe the work of the Temple Institute further tests the fulfillment of the prophecies over the Third Temple in the Bible. What was once far off or impossible in many believers' eyes is nowadays regarded by some as an almost inevitable event in God's plan for the world as it unfurls, the rebuilding of the temple. This prophetic blueprint, once a dream for centuries, is being fulfilled, marking a new era both for the Temple Mount and for the world. A turning point in worship. The Temple Mount has, of course, always been a highly contentious site, especially regarding religious activities. For decades, Jews have been banned from praying or performing rituals at this holy site. Even the most subtle acts of Jewish worship were not tolerated in the past, and were met with public protests, police action, and violent clashes. Political and religious tensions made it seem impossible to consider the idea of practicing Judaism openly at the Temple Mount. However, recent events thus marked a new point in history as they gradually lifted such restrictions to allow Jewish worshippers to practice their faith there with more freedom. Among the changes, one that seems very notable is that there is already more acceptance of the Jewish prayers at the site. For the first time in years, open permits for Jewish prayer quorums are being issued at the Temple Mount, which include groups of 10 worshippers. That is not just a political move, it's a spiritual landmark because it means restoring practices that have been forbidden for ages. Moreover, these prayer quorums are accompanied by the blowing of shofars during the Jewish holidays. These acts of worship, once scandalous and forbidden, now go on with little interference, indicating a fundamental shift in how the site is being treated. Perhaps the most striking change is the increasing ease of Jewish worshippers' ability to conduct rituals previously unimaginable at the Temple Mount. For instance, some Jewish faithful have been caught prostrating themselves on the stones of Temple Mount, a practice which was once prohibited. The wearing of talits, those prayer shawls, and tefillin, which is the prayer in phylacteries, has become very common during prayers. Some practices previously restricted because of the fear of violent opposition are now well exposed. Such opens their ability to openly worship, which is considerably different from the previous respect for forceful opposition. This change is more than a policy shift. It's a sign of profound spiritual transformation. The policy could be seen as a reflection of the political and social climate surrounding the Temple Mount's accessibility, but it also serves as a culmination of what will ultimately be the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. Many believe that this is the next step toward the Third Temple reconstruction, since it represents a new era of Jewish presence and worship at the site. Gradual yet powerful Jewish rituals and prayers restore the place as not only a site of political friction, but instead also as a place of spiritual rebirth in preparation for events that prophets have foreseen. With the shift in worship, a momentous ascent is about to unfold, something that has not happened in millennia, and it's bound to reshape everything we thought we knew. A shocking historic Cohens Ascent. For the first time in over 2 millennia, a Cohen, the male descendant of Aaron, the first high priest, ascended the Temple Mount in full ceremonial attire. It is of monumental significance as this practice has not been seen on the Temple Mount for almost 2,000 years. The Cohen, with the biblically ordained vestments which include the ephod, breastplate, and other sacred garments, ascended unto the site and performed the priestly blessing, which is an ancient ritual taken directly from the Bible. The act itself is emblematic, in that it clearly shows that the rituals of temple service are being brought closer to fulfillment. What differentiates this ascent so uniquely is not the act in and of itself, but the total lack of earnest opposition. Historically, such an event would have probably led to protests, strains in diplomatic relations, or even fights in the street due to the political and religious feelings behind the Temple Mount. This time, however, the event passed with minimal resistance, surprising many and speaking to a profound shift not only in the political climate but also in the spiritual feel of the place. The fact that a Cohen was able to perform the priestly blessing openly without major disruption attests to positive changes in the mindset toward Jewish worship on the Temple Mount, though these are slow to come. This historical ascent by Cohen is not just a ceremony, but is a prophetic moment. Such an important role of the Cohen and the return of priestly rituals forms an important part of the rebuilding of the Third Temple in the future, according to biblical prophecy. To Jews, it would mark a step toward their long-awaited return to temple worship, inasmuch as the priestly blessing would relate them directly to the services that would then follow in the rebuilt temple. The rise of Cohen is seen by many as a clear signal that rebuilding the temple is something that is no longer just a hope, but actually happening in real time. This makes the event also significant spiritually, for the Temple Mount is no longer only a flashpoint politically or a place of historical debate, but now a sacred space where prophecy is being fulfilled. The more the Cohen ascends the Temple Mount, the more crucial this site is considered to be, a place for spiritual revival and religious revival. Worship at this ancient contentious site is no longer seen as a political gesture or a symbolic act, but as a realistic step that fulfills the prophetic blueprint of the Third Temple according to the Word of God in the Bible. Prophecy and change. The rise of the Cohen and increasing acceptance of Jewish prayer at the Temple Mount held deeper, more profound change beyond political and social change. This for many is considered fulfilling key elements of biblical prophecy, especially concerning the eventual rebuilding of the Third Temple. Indeed, for centuries, an ostensibly impossible vision seemed to characterize the rebirth of a rebuilt temple in light of the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque. For some of these same faithful, however, the relatively gradual changes happening today, like Cohen's recent ascent in ceremonial attire and the growing freedom Jewish worshippers enjoy, are signs that prophecy is not merely real, but occurring before our very eyes. But Cohen's ascension was symbolic of something much bigger, the fulfillment of ancient prophecies. The rebuilding of the Jewish temple, the coming of the Messiah, and the ultimate restoration of Israel are intimately linked in biblical scriptures. The nature of this stage was marked by the fact that Aaron's descendant, Cohen, could carry out the priestly blessing on the Temple Mount without encountering serious resistance. The act links the contemporary world with the ancient heritage, reminding everyone that the spiritual meaning attached to the Temple Mount is neither out of the past context nor limited to the ancient times, but restored for a new purpose in keeping with prophetic timetables. With all these advancements in the making, what is left to ponder is what they say in the grand tapestry of the prophetic events. Some of the believers believe that the return of Jewish worship to the Temple Mount and the preparations for rebuilding the temple are warnings by God that the end times are approaching. The third temple is central to the apocalyptic events spoken of in the book of Daniel and Revelation and many of the prophetic writings. The gradual changes at Temple Mount, though minute, are perceived to be accelerating events that may signal the fulfillment of these prophecies and the birth of a new chapter in the history of the Bible. The time has come for this prophetic change, which is not limited to the temple itself, but reflects the grand shift that is taking place in the way the world perceives these ancient events. The fact that these acts of worship, which were thought only recently to be impossible or highly controversial, now are being done more openly, hints at a shift in the spiritual atmosphere surrounding the Temple Mount. These changes, as prophecies, seem to point to the approach of fulfilling biblical timetables and urging believers to take time to reflect on the meaning of the time and the wider implications for the futures of Israel and the world. Controversy on the global stage. The controversy unfolding at the Temple Mount has been immense on the global arena, as nations as well as international bodies have publicly voiced their opinions on the issue. The ease done on restrictions placed on Jewish worship and an increasing presence of Jewish rituals at the site has led to heightened tensions that are not only characterized by Israel but also the wider Middle East. Years have gone by, and the Temple Mount has remained a holy war site. Every change of status for this holy mount sparks fresh reverberations in global diplomacy. As Jewish prayer becomes more open now than in years preceding it, and rituals formerly restricted as illegitimate are now practiced, the world remains glued to this sacred site at this time of this fragile rhythm of power and religion. Its main ally, the United States, has strongly expressed its concern about recent developments at the Temple Mount. The Biden administration has several times condemned steps that alter the status quo, such as the actions of figures like Israel's National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, who openly called for increased Jewish access to the Temple Mount and eventually to the rebuilding of the Jewish temple. Statements issued by the U.S. State Department called for restraint from Ben-Gvir's provocative actions, claiming they are likely to lead to increased tensions in the area and undermine the efforts of peace builders. This criticism highlights the tough diplomatic position from which Israel operates as it faces internal pressure coupled with international scrutiny. Another country responding negatively to the latest development is Saudi Arabia, alongside several other Islamic nations that condemned what they deemed Israeli provocations at the Temple Mount. Saudi officials have decried Israeli actions that they believe threaten the Islamic sanctity of the site, particularly the Al-Aqsa Mosque, considered to be the third holiest site in Islam. The recent and mounting calls from the Muslim world for respect toward the historical and religious significance of the Temple Mount place the debate in the wider context of the political cleavage about the control and access of sacred spaces. These tensions, of course, are not merely political, but also are deeply interlocked with religious identity, each side appealing to history and divine rights on the site. The global controversy surrounding the Temple Mount is a reflection of the ongoing struggle to reconcile religious freedoms with political realities in one of the world's most contested regions. While Israel is pushing forward efforts to assert its sovereignty and give Jewish worshippers greater access, it needs to take into consideration international opposition and make sure that its moves do not provoke broader regional conflicts. The Temple Mount became a central locus informing religious, political, and diplomatic discourse, thus constituting an important flashpoint in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. but within the broader context of relations between nations. As these controversies unfold, they will continue to test the limits of diplomacy, sovereignty, and religious tolerance. The Third Temple's biblical prophecy. The Third Temple is mentioned prominently in the Bible, especially in eschatological visions shared by both Judaism and Christianity. In the Jewish world, it represents God's dwelling place on earth and, in its rebuilding, therefore the fulfillment of God's promise to restore Israel. Scriptures, such as Ezekiel's vision of a future temple, Ezekiel 40:48, reveal elaborate measurements and rituals for the rebuilding of the temple. This holy place is foretold to be important in the coming of the Messiah, an era of spiritual rejuvenation, peace, and the mighty hand of God. In Jews, the rebuilding of the temple is considered an act of restoration of a lost connection to God and the re-establishment of the sacrificial system and divine worship. In Christianity, the Third Temple is also significant, but the role taken is often viewed through the eyes of New Testament expectations. Some Christian doctrines believe that the rebuilding of the temple should be done as one of the significant facets in the end times prophecy, especially linked to the rise of the Antichrist. The book of Daniel and Revelation states that in the last 7 years of tribulation, the Antichrist will commit desecration in the temple and will force people to worship there. For Jews, therefore, it is a sign of an important aspect of spiritual fulfillment and even marks an important point in the end times for Christians. This dual prophetic expectation makes the Third Temple a symbol of hope and warning. In both cases, there are deep theological implications for each faith. The Third Temple is central to 2 apocalyptic visions, Daniel 9:27 and Revelation 13, in which it plays a major role in the rise of the Antichrist. The prophecies describe a time when the Antichrist will enter the temple and demand worship, ushering in a period of intense tribulation. This is termed the abomination of desolation, that moment when the holiness of the temple is desecrated. For Christians, the desecration of the Third Temple eventually marks the beginning of the Great Tribulation, which is a time of judgment and suffering before the return of Christ. The actions of the Antichrist in the temple in such a manner are seen as a pivotal moment in the fulfillment of biblical prophecy and the final restoration of divine order. While the Third Temple has great theological importance in both Jewish and Christian eschatology, it also has deep political and spiritual ramifications. The very fact that the Temple Mount, now supporting the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, further complicates the prophecy. In building a new Jewish temple in this very location, not only would biblical prophecy be fulfilled, but there would also need to be a seismic political and religious shift in the region. As preparations for the Third Temple continue, many believers view such developments as signs that the prophetic timeline is accelerating and brings mankind a little closer to a climactic moment in the unfolding of God's plan for the world. Unearthing the foundations. The recent discovery of an ancient quarry near Jerusalem draws huge attention nowadays, especially with the implications it brings for the rebuilding of the temple in the future. The quarry held stones particularly cut for use on the Temple Mount, and many experts suggest that these stones could be the actual materials needed for building the Third Temple. This discovery not only serves to enlighten one into how the temple was originally made, but also clears some of the practical barriers that have long made the rebuilding of the temple seem like an impossible feat. The existence of this quarry brings together ancient prophecies with modern restoring efforts about a sacred space. The quarry itself provides an interesting insight into the manner in which ancient builders managed to craft the massive stones that were to be used in building the temple. Evidence of sophisticated techniques that were utilized in cutting, shaping, and transporting these stones has been unearthed by archaeologists. This gives one tremendous insight into the construction process of the original temple. This discovery is particularly important because it demonstrated that the techniques utilized thousands of years ago can be repeated today with modern equipment, which makes rebuilding the temple more plausible than ever before. It underlines the possibility of rebuilding, not only as a religious or political concept, but as a genuine physical possibility. What's even interesting about this find is its timing. The discovery of these stones comes at a moment when there is growing interest in the rebuilding of the Third Temple, and an increasing number of people are wondering whether the prophecies of the temple's restoration are beginning to unfold in real time. The fact that these materials are already prepared, in a way, seems to suggest that the future of the temple is being quietly set into motion. The discovery is, therefore, a material representation of the biblical blueprint that gives a sense that prophecy is not only being fulfilled spiritually, but is also actualized through archaeological evidence. This quarry also has a deeper spiritual significance. For many believers, the quarry is not only an archaeological site, but a symbol of divine timing. The prepared stones ready for the temple are interpreted as an indication of God's direct involvement in orchestrating all the events that lead to the restoration of the sacred space. Being confronted with the practicality of rebuilding the temple and spiritual anticipation of its fulfillment leads to the conclusion that the groundwork for a future restoration is already being laid on earth as well as prophetically. As preparations continue, the discovery of the quarry reminds us that the plans for the temple are unfolding in ways both historically and divinely powerful. The discovery of these foundations goes beyond archaeology. It signals that we are witnessing the fulfillment of something profound, urging us to look inward and strengthen our spiritual commitment, a call to faith. While all this keeps unfolding in the events surrounding the Temple Mount, it then becomes deeply apparent that the fulfillment of biblical prophecy is not only the long-awaited hope, but a reality happening in the real world. The changes beginning to emerge in the Temple Mount, preparations for rebuilding the temple itself, and the signs indicating the nearness of fulfillment to end-time prophecies all instigate believers to reflect on the urgency of faith. These are powerful reminders that God's plan unfolds despite these events. The time to prepare is now for those believing in Him. Otherwise, these events are but milestones in history. They are also moments which invite one closer to His faith and reminds that the events of the world actually have a divine schedule. The call to faith reminds one of the restoration of the temple being more of a place of restoration to something deeper than any physical rebuilding. The third temple is a fulfillment of all the promises of God to His people, a house of heaven where everyone must come to have an encounter with God. As the fragments of prophecy continue to fall into place, this moment in history calls those who believe to have faith that God's plan for the world is coming together with precision and purpose. An opportunity calls for reflection on one's journey toward their own spirit and the role that faith plays in these significant times. In the light of the unfolding events, believers are invited not just to observe the changes, but to go into an encounter with the spiritual significance of what is being done. The uncovering of ancient stones that have been prepared for the temple, the ascent of the Cohen to the Temple Mount, and the opening of Jewish worship at the site are all part of a process that originates from God. To those of faith, such times should intensify the resolve to live out their beliefs with urgency and purpose. The call to faith today is not only a call to witness, but a call to action, to prepare actively, spiritually for the fulfillment of prophecy and to trust in the coming restoration. For the believer, this is time to be strengthened in faith and to be vigilant as the world watches and the signs of prophecy emerge. Those events on the Temple Mount are more than political or religious shifts. They mark spiritual signals that God's plan is actually unfolding. This is an appeal to all believers to believe in the sovereignty of God, be faithful, and keep their spiritual eyes awake, knowing that prophecy is coming to life before our very eyes. The promises of God are very close to fulfillment, an invitation to everyone to be part of His plan, embracing hope. His word is true and closer than ever. Thanks for watching. If you found this moment as mind-blowing as we did, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more updates on the unfolding events at the Temple Mount. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think this means for the future? Be sure to click on the next video on your screen for more insights you won't want to miss. Stay tuned, and thanks for watching.